behind every smile, there is a silence that no one hears. In the glow of Hollywood, I learned that fame can give you everything except the safety to grieve and the freedom to love without fear of losing it. Sandra Bullock has always been Hollywood's girl next door turned leading woman. With her radiant smile and warm presence, audiences believed they knew her. America's sweetheart, the woman who seemed to have it all. She won an Academy Award, built one of the most enduring careers in film, and crafted a reputation as one of the most bankable stars of her generation. But behind the flashbulbs and magazine covers, she was carrying a tragedy so private that it would later shock the world. In August 2023, headlines broke that the love of her life, Brian Randall, had died after a long and secret battle with ALS. The world mourned for Sandra, but few realized the depth of her silence. For 3 years, while cameras captured her on red carpets and interviews showed her laughter, she was living a double reality, balancing global fame with the private collapse of her partner's health. Every smile, every performance, every carefully chosen word hid a grief too heavy to name. This is not the story of Sandra Bullock, the Hollywood star who gave us blockbusters like Speed, The Blind Side, or Gravity. This is the story of the woman who, despite her fame, discovered that tragedy has no regard for status, wealth, or beauty. This is the Sandra Bullock who raised children while shielding them from paparazzi, the Sandra who found love later in life only to have it ripped away. The Sandra who learned that even at the height of fame, loneliness and heartbreak could not be escaped. Her journey is filled with contradictions, a public life carefully curated to appear effortless, and a private life scarred by betrayal, loss, and unspoken battles. Alongside her greatest triumphs, she endured humiliating tabloid scandals, the crumbling of a marriage, and the torment of watching someone she loved deteriorate before her eyes. To understand the tragedy of Sandra Bullock is to look past the Hollywood spotlight and into the shadows she worked so hard to keep hidden. Hollywood thrives on the illusion of perfection, but when the curtain drops, the truth often reveals itself in ways more haunting than any role an actor could play. Sandra's story reminds us that the cost of stardom is often silence, that the very people who light up our screens may be dimming inside. And so, we begin not with the actress who became one of the most beloved stars in America, but with the woman who, at 61, carries the weight of love lost and a heart scarred by fame's hidden toll. What kind of childhood shapes a woman strong enough to carry this pain and yet still smile for the world? To answer that, we must return to the beginning. Long before the Academy Awards and flashing cameras, Sandra Bullock's story began in a world far removed from Hollywood. She was born in Arlington, Virginia in 1964 to a family that carried both music and discipline in its veins. Her father, John Bullock, was a United States Army employee and voice coach, while her mother, Helga Meyer, was a German opera singer. The Bullock household was far from typical. Its walls echoed with rehearsals, travel, and the constant presence of performance. Sandra's earliest memories were not of play dates or schoolyards, but of sitting in the shadows of opera houses in Germany, watching her mother command the stage with a voice that could move audiences to tears. Growing up between cultures, Sandra felt both enriched and displaced. She spent much of her childhood in Nuremberg, Germany, speaking fluent German, navigating unfamiliar traditions, and learning to adapt. When the family moved back to the United States, she struggled to fit in. Her classmates in Virginia viewed her as different, the girl with the odd accent, the one who didn't quite belong. Behind her natural charm was a deep sense of isolation, a feeling that she would later describe as formative to her resilience.
Her mother's demanding world of opera instilled in Sandra an early awareness of perfectionism. Discipline and performance were non-negotiable. Helga Meyer was admired but also strict, expecting her daughter to carry herself with poise, to respect the craft, and to understand that applause was fleeting. For young Sandra, this duality, admiration mixed with pressure, would become a blueprint for her adult life. To succeed, she learned, meant to smile through discomfort, to hide vulnerability, and to push forward no matter the weight. But there was another side to her childhood, one filled with small rejections that cut deeper than anyone knew. Sandra was not considered the beautiful girl in school. She was often overlooked, sometimes mocked. She once admitted that she felt invisible during her teenage years, as though her efforts to connect went unnoticed. To cope, she became a performer even before she realized it. The class clown, the storyteller, the girl who could make others laugh while secretly masking her own uncertainty. These early years planted the seeds of empathy that would later define her acting. Sandra did not come from privilege or glamour. Instead, she came from displacement, discipline, and the need to prove herself in rooms where she didn't quite fit. That ache of outsiderhood gave her performances an authenticity that audiences instinctively recognized. When she played characters struggling to be seen, whether a lonely bus passenger in Speed or a working-class mother in The Blind Side, she wasn't just acting. She was reaching back into her own childhood, drawing from the same well of longing she had known since she was a girl. Sandra's foundation was not only shaped by love, but also by loss. The constant moving, the cultural divides, and the impossibility of ever fully belonging taught her how fragile stability could be. It forged her strength, yes, but it also left behind cracks invisible to the public eye. And those cracks, though hidden, would echo in her adult relationships, her career choices, and her quiet battles far from the spotlight. The stage was set. A girl raised in the wings of opera houses, hardened by loneliness, and trained in the art of performance long before Hollywood came calling. The question was never if she had talent, it was whether the world would finally see her.
Sandra Bullock's road to stardom was anything but instantaneous. After finishing her studies in drama at East Carolina University, she moved to New York City, a place that promised opportunity but demanded resilience. With little money in her pocket, she juggled waitressing jobs and bartending shifts, all while chasing auditions. Rejection was constant, and casting directors often told her she wasn't memorable enough, not glamorous enough, or simply not the right look. For a young woman who had already grown up feeling like an outsider, the sting of those words could have been crushing. Yet Sandra had inherited her mother's discipline. You show up, you keep going, and you never let them see your doubt. It was in New York's off-Broadway theaters where she first began to hone her craft, performing for small audiences, sometimes in productions that barely paid her rent. But even in those modest settings, something about her presence stood out. She wasn't the most polished actress, but she had an undeniable authenticity, a warmth that made audiences lean in. And in a city saturated with ambition, authenticity was rare. Her first brush with Hollywood came with Demolition Man in 1993. Cast alongside Sylvester Stallone and Wesley Snipes, Sandra played Lieutenant Lenina Huxley, a role that required her to hold her own opposite two of Hollywood's biggest action stars. It wasn't just her looks that caught attention, it was her timing, her humor, and her ability to ground even the most outrageous scenes in sincerity. Audiences walked away remembering her. For the first time, Sandra Bullock wasn't just another face in the crowd, she was someone to watch. But it was the following year that everything changed. Speed, 1994, catapulted her into the stratosphere. Cast as Annie Porter, a regular woman thrust into extraordinary circumstances, Sandra delivered a performance that was equal parts vulnerable and fierce. Starring opposite Keanu Reeves, she brought humanity to a high-octane action film, and audiences fell in love. The film grossed over $350 million worldwide and transformed Sandra overnight from a struggling actress into Hollywood's newest leading lady. Yet even in that breakthrough, the cracks were already forming. The same vulnerability that made her relatable also made her a target for typecasting. Studios quickly branded her as the girl next door, the safe romantic lead, the charming sidekick. And while the world embraced this version of her, Sandra herself worried. Would they ever allow her to be more than just likable? Could she ever be taken seriously in an industry that demanded women both please and transcend at the same time? Her rise to fame seemed meteoric, but it was paved with sacrifices invisible to the public. Long hours, relentless scrutiny, and the pressure to always appear approachable weighed heavily on her. She smiled, she charmed, she delivered. But behind that smile was a woman who knew how easily Hollywood could turn, how quickly adoration could dissolve. Sandra Bullock had arrived, but as she would soon discover, reaching the top of the mountain was only the beginning, and every mountain casts a shadow. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, Sandra Bullock had become one of Hollywood's most bankable stars. She was no longer the outsider trying to be noticed. She was the center of attention, commanding multi-million-dollar paychecks and leading blockbuster after blockbuster. Films like While You Were Sleeping, 1995, A Time to Kill, 1996, and Miss Congeniality, 2000, cemented her status as America's sweetheart. Charming, witty, relatable, she had an instinct for picking roles that resonated with audiences, playing characters that were not untouchable icons, but people viewers felt they could know in real life. The industry adored her. She was ranked among the highest-paid actresses in the world, celebrated for her box office draw, and praised for her versatility. Hollywood executives often noted that she had the rare ability to make a romantic comedy soar and then turn around and carry a heavy drama with equal conviction. Few actresses of her generation could match her reach. But her success was not only about acting. Sandra had a business mind. She launched her own production company, Fortis Films, which produced hits like Miss Congeniality and 2 Weeks' Notice. This gave her more creative control, rare for actresses in an industry notorious for sidelining women once they reached their 30s. She wasn't just a star, she was a power player. Off-screen, her life became part of the fascination. Paparazzi followed her every move. Magazines speculated about her relationships, and tabloids crowned her one of the most eligible women in Hollywood. With her down-to-earth humor and refusal to buy into the diva stereotype, she maintained an image that was refreshingly approachable. Even when cameras caught her grocery shopping in sweatpants or dropping by a local diner, the public adored her for seeming real. And yet, being real in Hollywood carried its own burden. The pressure to maintain relatability meant she could never fully let her guard down. Every relationship was scrutinized, every friendship dissected, every appearance photographed and judged. Sandra had entered a paradox. The more she became beloved, the more she had to protect her private self. Behind the curtain of fame, she also faced moments of deep exhaustion. The endless cycle of filming, promoting, and public appearances left little room for reflection or rest. Friends would later recall that she was generous, loyal, and relentlessly hardworking, but also guarded, rarely allowing others to see her struggles. Sandra had mastered the art of compartmentalization, smiling for cameras while privately carrying the weight of her own insecurities. Even her triumphs carried shadows. When she won the Academy Award for Best Actress in 2010 for The Blind Side, it seemed like the crowning moment of her career. She stood on the Dolby Theater stage, her voice trembling with gratitude as she dedicated the win to mothers, both biological and adoptive, who inspire children to believe in themselves. The audience rose in applause, tears in their eyes. But what the public didn't see was that her marriage to Jesse James was collapsing behind the scenes. And within weeks of her greatest professional victory, she would endure one of her most humiliating public betrayals. Sandra Bullock's height of fame was dazzling, filled with accolades, influence, and wealth. But like many Hollywood stars before her, the spotlight came with a cost. The erosion of privacy, the strain of perfection, the quiet ache of wondering how long the applause would last. She was at the top of her game, but beneath the glow of stardom, the shadows were lengthening. And soon, they would catch up with her in ways she could never have predicted.
For every star who rises, Hollywood seems to demand a fall. For Sandra Bullock, that moment came at the most ironic time, when her career reached its pinnacle. In 2010, she was celebrated with the industry's highest honor, the Academy Award for Best Actress. But within days, the private life she had worked so hard to protect collapsed under the harsh glare of tabloid headlines. Sandra's marriage to motorcycle builder and reality TV personality Jesse James had long been portrayed as unconventional but solid. The couple had married in 2005, and Sandra often spoke of him with affection in interviews, portraying their relationship as grounded and genuine. Yet just weeks after her Oscar win, reports broke that Jesse had been unfaithful. The tabloids erupted with scandalous details, naming multiple women, splashing headlines across front pages that turned Sandra's personal heartbreak into public spectacle. The betrayal was devastating, not only because of its scale, but because of its timing. Sandra had stood on stage thanking her husband for his support, unaware that his secret life would soon be exposed. Suddenly, the image of the perfect Hollywood power couple shattered, and Sandra found herself at the center of a media storm she had never invited. She responded not with public fury, but with silence. In April 2010, she filed for divorce and retreated from the spotlight. Later, in rare interviews, she admitted the depth of the humiliation. "I had no idea. The rug had been pulled out from under me." What made the betrayal even more painful was her simultaneous decision to finalize the adoption of her first child, Louis. Sandra became a single mother overnight, navigating both the joy of new motherhood and the grief of a broken marriage at the same time. The media, however, would not relent. Tabloids published daily updates, speculating about her emotional state, her ability to raise a child alone, and her future in Hollywood. Some publications lauded her resilience, while others fed on the scandal, reminding the world that even America's sweetheart was not immune to heartbreak. Professionally, Sandra continued to work, but the toll of public betrayal lingered. She turned down projects, became increasingly selective, and prioritized her children above all else. Friends noted that she withdrew into a smaller circle, fiercely protective of her private life. "Sandra doesn't let people in easily," one colleague shared, and after that, she became even more cautious. But her downfall wasn't limited to her marriage. Sandra also battled the darker undercurrents of fame. Relentless paparazzi stalking her home, invasive questions about her children, and the suffocating expectation to maintain her image as strong and unshakable. She later confessed to bouts of anxiety, admitting that at times she longed to step away from Hollywood entirely. Even her professional successes carried complications. After Gravity 2013 became a global phenomenon, earning her yet another Oscar nomination and cementing her as one of the highest-paid actresses in history, the spotlight intensified. The more she succeeded, the more she was chased, not only by fans, but by the unrelenting machine of celebrity culture. Behind the polished interviews and glamorous premieres, Sandra was learning that fame was not freedom. It was a cage with golden bars. And yet, despite the heartbreak, despite the invasions, she pressed forward. She poured herself into motherhood, into philanthropy, into carefully chosen roles. But the scars of betrayal, the isolation of fame, and the burden of constant scrutiny left her with a truth she could never escape. Even at the height of success, pain waits in the shadows. What the world didn't know, however, was an even deeper tragedy was quietly unfolding, one she would keep hidden until it could no longer be denied.
In the years following her public heartbreak, Sandra Bullock built a new life defined by resilience. She adopted a daughter, Lila, in 2015, giving Louis a sibling and expanding the family she had dreamed of. She chose projects carefully, balancing her career with her desire to remain present for her children. Outwardly, it seemed she had rebuilt her world, private, strong, untouchable. But beneath the surface, another trial was unfolding, one far more devastating than any headline could capture. In 2015, Sandra met Brian Randall, a photographer hired to capture her son's birthday party. What began as a professional engagement quickly blossomed into a relationship that many of her friends described as transformative. Brian was quiet, grounded, and deeply devoted, not only to Sandra, but to her children. At last, she had found a partner who brought her peace after years of turbulence. "He's the love of my life," she once told a friend. To the public, Brian was simply her boyfriend. To Sandra, he was the steady force that made her feel safe enough to imagine a lasting future. Yet, behind closed doors, Brian was fighting a silent battle. In 2020, he was diagnosed with ALS, a progressive and incurable neurodegenerative disease. Known as Lou Gehrig's disease, ALS slowly robs the body of its ability to move, to speak, to breathe, while leaving the mind cruelly intact. For 3 years, Sandra and Brian lived with the disease in secrecy. The public saw red carpets and occasional paparazzi shots. What they didn't see was the quiet suffering, the hospital visits, the small victories and crushing losses that defined their private life. Sandra chose to keep his illness hidden, a decision born of both love and necessity. She wanted Brian's dignity preserved, free from the voyeurism of tabloids, but this silence came with its own weight. Each public appearance required her to mask a private agony. Each smile concealed the knowledge that time was slipping away. Friends later shared that Sandra stepped away from Hollywood deliberately during those years. She turned down projects, declined major offers, and disappeared from the spotlight, not because she had lost ambition, but because she wanted to be present for Brian. She knew what was coming, one colleague recalled, and she chose to be with him until the very end. On August 5, 2023, Brian Randall passed away at the age of 57. The news stunned the world, not only because of his age, but because almost no one outside Sandra's inner circle knew he had been sick. In a statement released by his family, they confirmed that Brian had chosen to keep his battle private and that Sandra had honored that wish with unwavering devotion. For Sandra, the loss was shattering. Brian had been her partner for nearly a decade, a father figure to her children, a man who had given her the quiet stability she had longed for her entire life. To lose him, and to lose him in silence, was a tragedy few could comprehend. The public mourned with her, but even in grief, Sandra remained guarded. No tell-all interviews, no teary appearances, only a quiet retreat. Her silence louder than words. In the eyes of the world, she was a woman who had it all, but in truth,
At 61, she was a woman who had given everything to love, only to watch it slip away, piece by piece, until it was gone. Her tragedy was not a scandal splashed across headlines. It was the heartbreak of devotion, the agony of watching love fade under the cruelty of disease, the silence of grief carried in private. And it revealed a truth far more haunting than any tabloid could write, that even the brightest stars cannot escape the shadows of mortality.
Sandra Bullock's legacy is not only defined by her films or her awards, but by the way she carried herself through the storms of life. She has long been one of the most recognizable faces in Hollywood, yet her greatest achievements are not measured in box office numbers. They are measured in the resilience she modeled, the love she gave, and the silence she maintained when it mattered most. For decades, she has been a symbol of relatability, a superstar who somehow remained grounded. Her characters reflected ordinary women navigating extraordinary circumstances, and that authenticity came from a real place. Sandra knew what it meant to feel invisible, to feel betrayed, to grieve quietly. And because she knew those feelings, she gave performances that felt lived in, that touched audiences not just as entertainment, but as recognition of their own struggles. Her Oscar-winning turn in The Blind Side was celebrated for its heart, but it was also a reflection of her personal belief in family and chosen love. In her own life, she adopted children who became her anchor, raising them with fierce protection against the invasive world outside. In many ways, Sandra's greatest role has been that of a mother, a role she played not for cameras, but for life itself. The tragedy of losing Brian Randall revealed another side of her legacy, one that few expected. By choosing silence, by keeping his illness private, Sandra reminded the world that not every chapter of a celebrity's life is meant for public consumption. She demonstrated that dignity, compassion, and loyalty matter more than headlines. In an industry addicted to exposure, she chose devotion. Colleagues and friends describe her as someone who gives quietly, without demand for recognition. She has donated millions to disaster relief, supported education, and used her influence to uplift causes that mattered to her, often without fanfare. Her philanthropy, like her personal life, has been marked by discretion. At 61, Sandra stands as both a symbol of triumph and of fragility. She has shown that success does not shield anyone from heartbreak, that love does not guarantee permanence, and that grief is not diminished by wealth or fame. Her story is not just about what she gained, but about what she lost and how she carried those losses with grace. In the prologue, we began with a reflection that fame can give you everything except the safety to grieve. Sandra's journey proves this to be true. She lived in the glow of Hollywood, but her deepest battles were fought in silence, away from the cameras. Her tragedy is hidden not because it was small, but because it was too human, too intimate to ever belong to the public. Sandra Bullock's legacy is not only the films we will rewatch for decades to come, it is the reminder that behind the brightest smiles can lie the heaviest sorrows, and that even in grief, there is dignity in choosing love until the very end.
Sandra Bullock's story reveals more than the journey of a star. It exposes the harsh truths of an industry that thrives on exposure, but rarely makes space for vulnerability. Fame gave her power, wealth, and recognition, but it also demanded silence when she needed comfort most. It amplified her triumphs, yet turned her tragedies into whispers behind closed doors. Her hidden loss is a reminder that behind the glamour of Hollywood lies an unrelenting machine, one that consumes stories of love and grief without mercy. And yet, Sandra chose dignity over spectacle, love over fame, and silence over sensationalism. In the end, her story echoes the truth we return to again and again. Behind the glory, there is always a cost.